Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Doing well. Yeah. Trying to straighten that mess out in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's
They're
costing
still not listening, but a few Americans are listening to somebody.
Yeah.
Maybe not us, but they're listening to somebody. And the numbers of people who think or totally ignore it, I don't think anybody got excited one day and got up and say, you know, we haven't had a war for a while. Yeah. Why don't we get our congressman to vote to spend $1 trillion over in Ukraine? Yeah. But anyway, more people are waking up. It's always slow. It's a shame how they get excited and go along with it, and the war starts, and then it's hard to stop them. But I think they're moving in that direction. So we have a little bit of good news there. But the bad news we're going to start off with. Update: three U.S. raties. $2 billion more aid to Ukraine in the longer range missiles. You know who they might be looking at? They might be looking eastward. You know? And maybe they may use them, and maybe they don't use them. Maybe somebody else will and say they did. So it's so dangerous, but it never phases them because the decision making is people who can't be objective because they usually have dollar signs in front of them, like medical people being objective about vaccines if they're making billions of dollars over it. But anyway, that process is going, and they're still sending more money, and I guess they're going to wait until they totally run out of it. But at the same time, we hear little whispers around that maybe the American people are getting a little frustrated with this.
Yeah, you mentioned they're coming in our direction. That's always how war propaganda works. Remember, it was the same with Iraq. You know, you stood up, and very few Republicans stood up courageously against it, and they were demonized, just like we were demonized when we came out immediately against this war and ramping up for it. And then people slowly start coming in your direction. It's not a lot of fun to get beaten up on it, and it's not a lot of fun when you're right, because they never give you credit. But let's put this up because, Americans really are starting to take up and notice, because this was announced yesterday, $2 billion plus Ukraine aid package with longer range weapons. When the U.S. government is in a foreign policy hole, the only thing it can do is keep digging, right? The only thing they can do, there's no reverse button in U.S. foreign policy when it gets involved in an intervention. And that's what we're seeing here. Yet another $2 billion worth of aid. A couple of things I noticed about this new package, Dr. Paul. If you can put this next one on. This is interesting, and I think this is the nexus of corruption with neocon foreign policy. This was buried in the article. One of the officials said a portion of the package, expected to be $1.725 billion, would come from a fund known as the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which allows President Joe Biden's administration to get weapons from industry rather than U.S. weapons stocks. So what that means is we're not giving them our old weapons. We are going to the arms manufacturers and saying, here's what we want you to make and manufacture for us to send to Ukraine. Now, if that does anything to help our security, I'd like to know about it.
We'll be looking for a long time if you think you're going to find it.
Yeah, that's the corruption.
Anyway, this was sort of like a footnote in that article, and it comes from the New York Voice of Ukraine, and they say Ukraine needs. Now, this is just so you don't back off on sending in more money. The people have to be ready. Ukraine needs up to 200 multi-purpose aircraft, F-16s, most likely candidates to replace Soviet jets. Isn't it interesting that Ukraine has Soviet jets fighting Russia?
Yeah.
And now we want to get rid of those so we can fight them with American new weaponry, like you mentioned.
Well, the Russians already got rid of those. They're all blown up. That's why they need more of them.
Yeah.
But here's more about the scam, and this is the new weapon system. There are two things about this. First of all, I think is the corruption, because these companies are making a fortune. Anyone who doubts that, go look at their Dow charts. They're making a fortune off of this war, just like, as you've said, the pharmaceutical companies made a fortune off of COVID. Deep corruption in American society. Go to this next one. It also has an added component of being even more dangerous, because new weapons are being sent yet again to Ukraine. And these funds will go toward the purchase of a new weapon, the ground-launched small-diameter bomb made by Boeing, with a range of 94 miles, et cetera, et cetera. The GLSBD, I don't, that's so funny, is made jointly by Saab and Boeing. And a Saab is a Swedish company, and Swedes are among the most aggressive when it comes to Russia. So these aggressive companies and countries are going to have a windfall in manufacturing these brand new types of weapons for Ukraine. And they say that Ukraine is a testing ground for new weapons. And the battlefield is covered in blood for these Western arms manufacturers to see what works best and what doesn't work all that well.
You know, they always have to have a justification, you know, scare people, and that's how they did it in Vietnam. And some have compared what they're doing now exactly like Vietnam. Danger, danger, danger. And the American people go along with it for a good many years, and after you get up to about 40, 50, 60,000 people killed, Americans, and then maybe we're doing the wrong thing. But right now, this is not like the person that runs things and they're going to announce it tomorrow, but it's the information put out there to see what kind of response is. This is reported by our friends at Zero Hedge. Former UK, like they're really a powerhouse with American money and all that. Defense minister says NATO may need to send ground troops to Ukraine. Who's NATO anyway? Do you think we belong to NATO, or do we finance NATO, or my goodness, it's all our money? And if they think they have the neatest trick, is that we're going to protect our industries and we're never going to go back to body bags that come back to America. Thank goodness at least that's out there. But it's not going to, it's going to just increase the anger against the United States and the patsies that are being used to run our show. And a lot of people think that, oh, well, you're on NATO, you have a vote. No. NATO is an arm of the U.S. government, and that is my assessment. And so you can't say NATO is separate. So when they start talking about maybe there's actually a war going on between Russia and NATO, well, those are dangerous thoughts. And the problem is it looks that way. But the big deal that we have had with it all is who started this war? Well, we sort of lean to the side that it was really made antagonistic between the two with our policies. We've gone a long way to find a war to fight, and then that's when we got NATO to go up and pester the Russians, and it's been ongoing there. And every day it's more money. But let's hope we wake up and hope the people wake up, because ultimately the people have to decide to send a message to us. Enough is enough. You better feed our poor people here before you and look at our borders before you go to Ukraine.
And that article really encapsulates the delusion of the people who are supposed to be in charge. Former UK defense minister says we're going to have to put some ground troops. But there was a report a couple of days ago that said the UK military is gutted, completely gutted. I think it was a US general. You probably saw that. And they said it's going to take, they're desperately trying to build up their military. It will take 5 to 10 years for them to build 2 divisions of troops. That's about 20,000 troops. It's going to take them up to 10 years just to get 20,000 troops. The Russians have 500,000 troops in the battlefield right now, as Colonel McGregor has said many times. It's just the disconnect between reality and the fantasies of these types of people is just incredible.
I keep talking about the end comes with the bankruptcy, when they run out of money. And I keep, I think, visualizing and at least let people think, well, maybe not tomorrow, but next week or two. But this gives you the indication. I mean, getting this type of information from McGregor, this tells you that it is already apparent there. And that's maybe why he's a former UK defense minister. But the policies really aren't changing, because will the UK change its colors if we don't? No, as long as they play the game. They want to be a player again. They're still having dreams of grandeur about when they had an empire. Well, they're now participating in the dissolution of the next empire.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, because the delusions of grandeur among the elites versus the awakening of the population. And Colonel McGregor has written about this. In fact, I just put an article up by Alistair Crook, a former British diplomat. Really, 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 I've read him for years on the Ron Paul Institute homepage. And he quotes some of the things that McGregor has said about this growing discontent among the population in Europe and in the U.S., which is directly at odds with the increasing bombacity of the elite class. Well, I think this segues right into our next story, which is a brand new Pew Research poll came out yesterday. I love polls, especially when they go the way I want. But here's their headline. As Russian invasion nears 1 year mark, partisans grow further apart on U.S. support for Ukraine. Now, I would not have used that headline because that really is not what the poll shows. That's a little bit of a politicization. So if you go to the next one, here's an article about the poll. This is more accurate. More Americans believe the U.S. provides too much support to Ukraine. A growing portion of Americans think the U.S. is giving too much support to Ukraine as the Biden administration and other Western allies have taken steps to escalate their backing. And here, let's look at the chart because that's where all the truth is in the chart. Now, they want to make it look partisan, and I would agree that Republicans are more dramatically turning against the war. Back in March of 22, only 9% thought we were doing too much. That number is up to 40%. Almost half the Republicans think we're doing too much, and only 17% of Republicans believe we're not doing enough. But if you look at the Democrats, they have tripled in the percentage of Democrats who think we're doing too much. And they still only have 23%, a small minority of Democrats who think we're not doing enough. So we are seeing a real shift in American public opinion against this war. I think that's something that we should take courage in.
And, you know, the point you're making is very, very significant because we always talk about bipartisan support for the wars. All the money over the years, the whole time I was in Washington, it was always bipartisan, still is bipartisan when they spend the money. So if you can get this, and when Vietnam finally, reached the level where the people said enough is enough, actually the Democrats were ahead of the Republicans because they were less supportive of the war.
Yeah.
But then the Republican comes shifting over. But now it's a mixed deal, but we still have, McCall and McCarthy and some of these people, and they have a lot to say about this. And there's a lot of money that flows into the Republicans. So, but at least the message is out there because they're still political animals.
Yeah.
As much as they have to be a political animal to collect these funds from the pharmaceutical companies and the weapons industry, eventually, their source of support and their job depending on fooling the people.
Yeah.
And maybe they're fooling less people than they used to. And the door is open. Maybe there will be an avalanche soon. Next week, we'll have a better poll.
How did you ever get elected from not taking money from these military, manufacturers?
Getting elected was one thing. I worked hard and all that stuff. But maybe the people agreed with me.
Yeah. Or like
more so than anybody, even I. Yeah. Because, there were times when I would take a position and I can remember taking them and think, well, I was here, but I did what I said I would do. I'm ready.
I remember a few of those times.
then it turned into be a positive.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. As you said, one person told you, well, you told the truth. The representatives don't understand that people know better than that. Well, let's move on because this is a similar, very related thing, which is kind of, I guess you could say a clown world kind of thing. But as you always say, the U.S. government investigated itself and found that it did nothing wrong. And this is from Zero Hedge. We found no misuse of funds in Ukraine, the U.S. Treasury says. And they add with a straight face. So they did a study of all the money we've given Ukraine, and they found that it was absolutely perfect.
Well, that sounds like a lie. Misinformation, disinformation is not. They don't lie. So they come up with this, but they have this idea that if they do this, everybody's going to believe them. But all they do is they increase the number of people that looked for other sources of information, so it all backfires. So you can't kill truth.
Yeah.
It can be very annoying, and they get away with the lies, and they start wars with it. They build up lies about COVID and all these things. But eventually, truth wins out, and I think that's what's going to happen. And even though they're fibbing on this a bit, there's no misuse of it. But for years they've had these bills in, the conservatives would do this, waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah.
They spend all this money, and it all goes for projects that are absolutely wrong. The bureaucracy is there, and but even if they had the money and they did what they said, that is a misuse. Military interventionism overseas and starting wars, 100% of it is misuse. Here they're saying 100% no misuse. So I don't think we're on the same page yet.
Yeah.
So we have to keep plugging away.
Every dollar is misused. Exactly, that's it. Well, here's a reminder: the U.S. Treasury may have decided that the U.S. government is absolutely perfect. Ukraine hasn't taken a penny of it and done anything wrong with it. Perfect angels and saints. Well, here's a reminder of just a few days ago. If we can put on that next clip. Here's a little reminder. No misuse. Oh, but wait. No, go back one, please. Ukraine rocked by corruption scandal. Wave of top officials resign. Sports cars, mansions, and luxury vacations as people suffered. So there's a disconnect between reality. Half the government had to resign because they were corrupt. And the Western press, Dr. Paul, framed it not as, oh my gosh, look how corrupt they are. It was, oh, that's wonderful. They're finally moving against corruption. It's just amazing.
No, sometimes it's not the words that they say, and I think you just alluded to something that I've used because it happened. That after a lecture that I had given, that some young people came up and they were very interested and they really liked what I was saying, and they praised me because they were very interested in the Constitution and they were sincere. I really believed it. So I said, yes, but didn't the other candidate say the same thing? I heard so-and-so, say that, oh, we need to, protect our Constitution. We need to fight for our freedoms and all this. I said, why? And I was curious on how they sorted it out. And they simply said, well, we didn't believe them.
Yeah.
So they sense that, and I think in the human nature is that even in miscellaneous activities between human beings, I think most people can sort of sense when somebody's telling a lie.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a little bit of information, of course, there's too many lies that they get away with.
Yeah. Well, here's some more bad news for both the Treasury Department, which found Ukraine absolutely angelic in its use of money, and for Ukraine itself, and that's that the Transparency International just released their new report, 2022 Corruption Perception Index. And here it is, reveals scant progress against corruption as the world becomes more violent. However, within that report, not good news for Ukraine. Let's go ahead and move to the next. They actually haven't gotten better, but they've gotten worse. Ukraine rises in Corruption Perception Index. Ukraine ranked 116th out of 180 countries in the Corruption Perception Index, rising 6 points in the rating compared to last year when it ranked 122nd. So they've moved way up the charts for being more and more corrupt. I don't know how you're going to square that circle.
Well, let's make sure they see this as being more objective than the other ones. That's the important thing. And most of the time, it isn't the people who don't give support or get involved. I think it's more apathy on the total numbers, but it also means that they're vulnerable or they're open to, if they hear something else, maybe they will shift their position. But a lot of people, when the COVID thing, remember at the beginning, it was sort of dangerous, and people knew about vaccines, and I'd go along with it. So it took a while. People were suspicious, and then there was a shift. The shift, once it started, the momentum was there, and it's still there, even because there's still a challenge to it. But no, I think that the people do have to wake up, because and instead of looking at, they were apathetic and they didn't go on, well, let's recognize that they're apathetic. Let's make them less apathetic and give them intelligent, believable reasons why we shouldn't be doing this. And I think that's what's happening about Ukraine.
Yeah.
People saying, listing how many miles away it is just one thing.
Yeah.
And all the foolishness and all the see the other side of it just lies and said, oh, we checked it out. There's no misuse of the funds. That's a farce. I bet if we did a poll and asked the American people and did it on 10,000 people, I wonder how many would say, oh no, we would never be involved in misuse of our funds.
Yeah.
It'd be a joke.
Well, as you always say about the COVID thing, it was really the hypocrisy that undermined the support. When you saw Gavin Newsom dining without a mask on in a luxury places, in this, there was actually a picture I saw earlier of Ukrainian officials with Rolex watches in the fields. When people start seeing that, that's when they start realizing that there's a real problem. But I think if you're ready, I might close out and I might just point out that perceptions are changing about this war, and it couldn't come sooner because we don't really want to have World War III with a nuclear bomb. But when the neocons are cornered, of course, and they have control of the White House and State Department, when they're cornered, they're more dangerous. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a big anti-war rally in just a couple of weeks in Washington, D.C., February 13th, and I'll link to it. And I can tell you without giving you details, the neocons are desperately trying to sink this event. They're doing everything they can. They're terrified. They just announced that our old friend and board member Dennis Kucinich will speak there, which is great news because he's always great at rallies. So it's nice to see that he'll be there. They're desperately trying to sink this rally. So if you can make it, go ahead and be there in D.C. And again, I will plan a link. But I think we're getting some momentum. So now is not the time to back off. It's a time to charge ahead. So keep that in mind, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And Daniel, you did mention in your statement earlier on about the British. They're having financial problems. And if you think about their long-term history, they did have a big empire. And as far as size goes and control of the world, they were one of the biggest, if not the biggest. And but it was a financial thing. The wars came, and they spread themselves too thinly around the world, and finally do it. So they're now, sort of in a daydream because we keep dealing with them, and we sort of treat them so they don't get upset and lose confidence. We let them go, you can come along and send us a couple tanks. You can be a participant, but oh yeah, I know you're shortchanged, so here's the money. We'll buy the tanks for you. But we have to have this perception. So that goes on and on, but eventually it changes. And it changes, for economic reasons. A lot of people talk about economics over here and foreign policies over here, and I insist they're all one and the same. And when countries extend themselves, and to a large degree, they will eventually have to live within their means. One thing that Ronald Reagan told me on a flight many years ago, we were talking about the gold standard, and he reminded me, of course, he says, any great country, if it ever goes off the gold standard, it spends endlessly, it will no longer be a great country. Maybe not a week and a day afterwards, but as time goes on, once you open the floodgates of fiat money, the ball game's over. And boy, I'll tell you what, we're hearing a lot of news about preparation for who's going to replace the dollar. And there's people vying for this. And it may come with a sudden burst depending on worldwide events, but it might take a while too. Generally, most reserve currencies didn't go overnight, but they can happen. But I don't think we have to say, well, maybe we should, maybe it won't hurt us this time. Maybe we can have our empire and it won't have this effect. No, it always has it. The big question is when will people recognize what is happening and that we can't maintain it? And I said, when the price of food goes up and your wallet is empty and there are people in the streets, then you start better thinking about not only a sound economic policy, sound monetary policy, and come around to thinking, yes, the founders were work. We ought to mind our own business and have a non-interventionist foreign policy and not get into these alliances around the world unnecessarily pretending that we can tell people how to live. So a libertarian society, we don't tell individuals how to live. as long as they don't hurt people and steal their stuff, and personal habits and all should be unregulated. But we ought to apply this to the world forces too, the countries. But we don't. It's automatic. We have to control this. And Daniel and I have talked frequently, and we'll continue to talk about how did we get into this mess, because I think that'll help convert people. And it wasn't when Russia took Ukraine back. No, it's a long history to that, and we find out that there truly is a tremendous antagonism between NATO and Russia, and people worry about that, and they should, because it's expanding almost on a daily basis. That's why we like to point out the positive things, move it in the other direction, why it's the proper principle, it's the proper position for the American people, it's the proper moral principle, and that is the reason that we feel so enthused about continuing to promote the cause of liberty. And we welcome your support, and we appreciate very much you tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.